Decoded.
Welcome back, bookworms and history buffs, to another episode of Book Decoded. Today, we're tackling a real geopolitical thriller.
Oh, yeah.
Hal Brand's The Eurasian Century.
Mm-hmm.
So if you've ever wondered why some parts of the world just can't seem to stay out of the headlines, this is the episode for you.
Yeah. You know what's really cool about this book is that it's not just like a boring history lecture or something. It's like a detective story, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Unraveling the motives and strategies of all these empires and nations as they fought for control of this massive landmass, Eurasia. And it really makes you see how, like, the past is still shaping our world today.
Okay, so let's unpack this idea of Eurasia as the global pivot, right? Which Brands really digs into. He introduces us to this guy, Halford Mackinder, a British geographer, who way back in 1904 came up with this wild theory about the heartland.
Oh, yeah. I remember when I first came across Mackinder's heartland theory. He basically argued that the heartland, this resource-rich central region of Eurasia, was the key to controlling the world island, which is like Europe, Asia, Africa all combined. And if you control a world island, well, you basically rule the world.
But it's like having all the best property in a game of Monopoly. It's not just about like conquering land, but the strategic advantage of controlling these specific areas. Mackinder was ahead of his time.
Way ahead.
In seeing how geography, resources, and technology all kind of play together to shape who has power.
He even talked about railroads, which were a brand new technology back then.
Right.
And how they could totally shift the balance of power.
It's like someone predicting the internet back in the horse and buggy days. So speaking of railroads, Brands brings up the Trans-Siberian Railway and how it basically started the first big conflict of the 20th century, the Russo-Japanese War.
Yeah, that was a major turning point.
All because of a train line.
Well, Russia was trying to show off its power in Northeast Asia, but Japan saw that railway as a direct threat.
Oh, I see.
Suddenly, Russia could move troops and supplies right to Japan's doorstep.
It's like building a highway right through your rival's backyard.
Exactly. It's a classic example of how infrastructure can become a flashpoint for conflict.
So Mackinder, even though some people thought he was a little out there, he was pretty spot on about Eurasia becoming this battleground for global power.
He really was. It's almost like he had a time machine or something.
Right.
And sadly, his predictions about the importance of Eurasia proved to be tragically accurate as the century unfolded.
So let's fast forward to World War I. How did this idea of controlling Eurasia play out in that conflict? It seems like everyone was trying to grab a slice.
Well, Germany, you know, heavily influenced by Mackinder's theories, they saw their chance to dominate the continent. They had this ambitious plan called Middle Europa to control Central and Eastern Europe.
Oh, wow.
Think of the resources and manpower they thought they could get their hands on.
Yeah, it was all about challenging British naval power and becoming the top dog in Europe.
Right.
Brands really paints a picture of World War I as this truly global struggle, with battles raging from one end of Eurasia to the other.
Yeah, it was a clash of empires on an epic scale.
But it wasn't just about military strategy. It seems like ideology played a huge role, too.
Oh, absolutely.
With democracy facing off against autocracy.
It was like two different visions for the future of humanity were clashing.
It was a fight for the very soul of civilization. Okay, so amidst all this chaos, where was America in all of this? They seemed pretty hesitant to get involved at first.
Well, remember, the U.S. was still a relatively young nation back then, and they had this history of staying out of European conflicts.
Right, like they were trying to figure out their place in the world.
Exactly, but World War I changed everything. It forced them to confront the fact that what happened in faraway lands could directly impact their own security.
So it was a wake-up call for America.
Oh, yeah, big one.
Shattering their sense of isolation and forcing them to engage with the world in a whole new way.
And that realization had major ripple effects throughout the rest of the 20th century, and even into our own time.
It's amazing how one event can have such a lasting impact.
I know, it's like a domino effect.
Setting off a chain reaction that shapes the course of history.
You know, it's wild how World War I kind of paved the way for these totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan.
Oh, yeah?
Brands argues that the chaos after the war and all the resentment over that Treaty of Versailles, it created this perfect storm for these extreme ideologies to take root.
It's like even after all that devastation, the seeds of future conflict were already being planted.
Exactly. It's a sobering thought.
And it wasn't just Germany and Japan, right? Brands also talks about Italy under Mussolini.
Oh, yeah.
Going down that same path of fascism dreaming of reviving the Roman Empire.
It's like the ghosts of ancient empires were haunting the 20th century.
I know, right?
The 1930s saw this scary trend of aggression and expansionism, fueled by these ideologies that glorified war and conquest.
It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck.
These regimes weren't content with the status quo. They wanted to reshape the entire world in their own image.
And that meant controlling huge chunks of Eurasia.
Exactly.
But it seems like there were chances to stop this from happening. Brands talks about how Britain and France tried to appease Hitler,
Right.
hoping to avoid another war, but it just made him bolder.
Appeasement rarely works in the long run.
It's a classic case of good intentions backfiring.
Yeah. It's a tough lesson to learn.
So what does all this tell us about the balance of power? Was it just that the Axis powers were stronger? Or was there something more to it?
It's definitely more complicated than just counting tanks and soldiers. The balance of power isn't just about military might. It's also about commitment resolve and the willingness to act decisively when someone threatens you.
So basically, you need to be willing to stand up for what you believe in.
Exactly, even when it's risky.
And it sounds like the democracies, at least at first, didn't have that unity of purpose.
You could say that.
They weren't ready to face the threat head on. Maybe because the memories of World War I were still so fresh.
It's understandable, but it gave Hitler a huge advantage.
Oh, I see.
He was able to conquer most of Europe before the Allies finally got their act together.
It's a tragic reminder that hesitation and disunity can make conflict more likely.
Yeah, it's a lesson we should never forget.
Brands doesn't shy away from the horrors of World War II. The Blitzkrieg, the atrocities, the sheer scale of the destruction.
It's a chilling reminder of what happens when powerful nations embrace hatred and conquest.
It's a chapter of history we should never forget.
Absolutely not just because of the suffering it caused, but because of the lessons it teaches us about the fragility of peace.
Okay, so with the world at war once again, where did America fit into all of this? Did they learn from their late entry into World War I?
Well, at first, there was still this strong isolationist sentiment in the U.S.
Right.
They wanted to stay out of another European war, focus on their own problems.
But President Roosevelt saw the danger Hitler posed.
He did.
And realized that America couldn't afford to just sit back and watch.
He understood that staying neutral wouldn't protect them from the storm that was brewing.
But it still took a while for America to fully commit. It wasn't until Pearl Harbor that they officially joined the war.
That's right.
It seems like it took a direct attack on their own soil to finally get them involved.
The attack on Pearl Harbor was a turning point, both strategically and psychologically.
I see.
It galvanized American public opinion and gave Roosevelt the justification he needed to mobilize the nation for war.
And once they were in, America's entry was decisive.
It was.
Brands talks about how the Allies working together were able to defeat the Axis powers.
It was a truly global effort.
A testament to human ingenuity, courage, and resilience.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It sounds like winning World War II was a monumental effort, requiring incredible sacrifices and cooperation.
It was a victory for freedom and a reminder of the importance of international collaboration.
But it's almost unbelievable that after such a devastating war, the world plunged right back into another global standoff.
I know, right?
What happened to all those hopes for lasting peace?
Well, remember the Grand Alliance that defeated Hitler? It was a marriage of convenience born out of necessity, once the common enemy was gone. The ideological and geopolitical differences between the U.S. and the Soviet Union became impossible to ignore.
So it wasn't just about Stalin being a difficult personality, but deeper ideological differences that made cooperation impossible.
Exactly.
It seems like those differences went beyond just political systems and touched on fundamental values and beliefs about how society should be organized.
Stalin was a ruthless dictator with his own ambitions for expansion. He believed the spread of communism was inevitable and was determined to bring Eastern Europe under Soviet control.
So the Cold War wasn't just another great power conflict. It was a struggle between two fundamentally different ways of life.
You got it.
Two competing ideologies vying for global dominance.
It was a battle for hearts and minds as much as it was for military and economic supremacy.
So how did this clash of ideologies play out on the geopolitical stage? What moves did each side make on this massive Eurasian chessboard?
Well, the U.S. adopted a strategy of containment, aiming to prevent the spread of Soviet influence.
Containment.
Yeah, it involved providing economic and military aid to countries threatened by communism, building up their own military, and forming alliances like NATO to counter Soviet power.
So basically, America was trying to prevent another totalitarian takeover of Eurasia. Like, what happened with Hitler?
It seems like they had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of appeasement and the importance of acting early and decisively.
So containment meant making a long-term commitment to shaping the balance of power in Eurasia, even if it meant getting involved in some messy situations.
That's right, and that commitment was tested time and time again throughout the Cold War, from the Berlin blockade to the Korean War. The U.S. had to constantly show that they were serious about standing up to Soviet aggression.
It sounds like a high-stakes game of chicken.
It was a dangerous game, but the stakes were incredibly high.
And that commitment came with some serious costs, right? Brands talks about how America built up a massive national security state, got involved in costly proxy wars, and even had to deal with things like McCarthyism and the Red Scare at home.
The Cold War had a profound impact on American society, both domestically and internationally.
It was a period of great tension and anxiety, but also a time of progress and resilience.
It's a fascinating and complex period of history.
What really struck me in this section of the book is the whole nuclear arms race. Can you imagine the pressure those leaders were under?
Oh, yeah.
Knowing that one wrong move could literally mean global annihilation.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it?
It really is.
Brands does a fantastic job of capturing that atmosphere of paranoia. You know, all those calculations involved in managing this terrifying new reality.
He explains how the U.S. at first relied on this massive retaliation strategy,
Right, basically saying, mess with us and we'll unleash nuclear hellfire.
hoping that fear alone would keep the Soviets in check.
It was a high-stakes gamble, for sure.
But as the Soviets built up their own nuclear arsenal, that strategy must have become increasingly dangerous.
Oh, absolutely.
So did they ever find some kind of stable balance? Or was it just a constant game of chicken?
Well, Brands explains how the U.S. had to adapt their approach. They shifted towards flexible response.
A flexible response.
Yeah, a more nuanced strategy.
Okay.
It involved strengthening conventional forces and developing a wider range of nuclear options,
Yeah.
you know, from tactical nukes to limited strikes.
So basically trying to create more options.
Right, instead of just going straight to all-out nuclear war.
Which makes sense.
The stakes were just too high for anything less.
But this flexible response idea, as Brands points out, wasn't without its problems.
Yeah, it led to some serious miscalculations.
Like in the Vietnam War?
Vietnam was a real tragedy. And part of it was this belief that they could gradually escalate pressure without triggering a wider conflict.
But it didn't really work out that way,
It turned out to be a costly and ultimately futile strategy,
showing how even the best-laid plans can go awry.
especially in the messy world of geopolitics.
And of course, the Cold War wasn't just about the two superpowers, right? There were all these newly independent nations emerging from colonialism,
Oh, yeah, a whole new playing field.
many of them struggling with poverty, political instability, and the temptation of communism.
It was a complex landscape, for sure.
So how did the U.S. handle this third world aspect of the Cold War?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. As you read the book, you'll see examples of the U.S. supporting some pretty shady regimes.
Oh.
Meddling in elections, getting involved in covert operations.
It sounds like a morally gray area,
It was definitely a time of difficult choices.
driven by the fear of communism spreading and the need to protect American interests.
It's a reminder that foreign policy can sometimes lead to some tough compromises.
So with all these tensions and complexities playing out across the globe, how did this decades-long struggle finally end? Was it simply a matter of the U.S. outlasting the Soviets?
It was a combination of factors, really.
Okay.
The U.S. played a big role with its military strength, support for allies, and economic pressure on the Soviet Union.
But the Soviets had their own internal problems, too.
Oh, yeah, a stagnant economy, a repressive political system, and growing disillusionment among their own people.
It's like a house of cards waiting to collapse.
Exactly, and eventually it did.
You mentioned earlier how President Reagan played a key role in the final stages of the Cold War. Did Brands get into specifics about what Reagan did to hasten the Soviet Union's downfall?
Oh, yeah, Reagan was a master communicator and a shrewd strategist.
Okay.
Brands highlights how he took a much tougher stance towards the Soviet Union.
Right. He famously called them the evil empire.
Exactly, and he launched initiatives like the Strategic Defense Initiative, which aimed to develop a missile defense system that could potentially neutralize Soviet nukes.
So Reagan really shook things up
He did.
and forced the Soviets to confront their weaknesses.
He also skillfully exploited the cracks that were already forming in their system.
So it wasn't just military and economic pressure, but also this battle of ideas and values.
Absolutely.
It seems like Reagan understood the power of appealing directly to people who were yearning for freedom.
It's a powerful reminder that even the mightiest empires can crumble if they lose the support of their own people.
The fall of the Soviet Union wasn't just about tanks and missiles, but about the enduring human desire for freedom and self-determination.
It's a testament to the power of ideas. And the idea of liberty can ultimately triumph over even the most formidable obstacles.
But as we know, Brands doesn't end the book with the West's victory lap. He points to new challenges emerging in the 21st century, a new era of geopolitical competition that he calls Fortress Eurasia.
Right, it's a different kind of game now.
So what's the biggest difference between this new era and the Cold War rivalry?
Well, what's interesting about this Fortress Eurasia concept is that it's not driven by one single ideology like communism was.
Brand sees a potential alliance between China, Russia, and Iran, countries with different goals and ambitions.
But they have some things in common.
Yeah, what unites them is this desire to challenge the U.S.-led world order and reshape the global landscape to fit their own interests.
So it's a much more fluid and complex situation than the Cold War.
Way more complex.
So what are the main threats posed by this Fortress Eurasia? Are they mainly economic, military, or something else entirely?
Brands paints a pretty worrying picture of a multi-pronged threat.
Okay.
He points to China's growing economic and military power, Russia's willingness to use force and their massive nuclear arsenal, and Iran's regional influence and support for unconventional warfare.
It sounds like a recipe for instability.
It has the potential to disrupt global trade, weaken democracies, and even spark new conflicts.
So given these interconnected threads, what does Brand suggest we do? How should the U.S. and its allies approach this challenge?
He calls for a more proactive and multidimensional strategy.
He emphasizes strengthening alliances, investing in military capabilities, and competing effectively in new domains like cyberspace and information warfare.
It sounds like we need to be more adaptable and innovative.
Absolutely. The old Cold War playbook won't cut it anymore.
So as we wrap up our exploration of the Eurasian century, we're left with a sense of both urgency and the scale of the challenges ahead.
It's a sobering realization.
But Brands reminds us that history isn't set in stone. Human choices still matter.
They do.
And even facing these obstacles, there's always hope for a better future.
That's a message we should all hold on to.
It's not just about understanding the past, but about using that knowledge to shape a more peaceful and prosperous future.
Exactly. And that's what makes this book so relevant today.
Well said. So on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. What role will you play in shaping the future of the Eurasian century? Thanks for joining us on Book Decoded.